Mr. Beissert, thank you very much for coming to see us here at UNC Chapel Hill for giving a talk in the Craftsman Events series. You are based as a diplomat in the German embassy in Washington, D.C. You have been based in many German embassies in Asia, Beijing, Taipei, Tokyo, and other embassies. Currently, Chinese-European, Chinese-American relations are difficult. We have the so-called trade war. Can you explain to us perhaps what caused the trade war and what is the current stage, and do you see any way forward so that we can get out of that trade war as soon as possible?
I think there are several factors which contributed to these conflicts in the trade field between the US and China. And one, of course, being that the Chinese economy has grown significantly. China is now the second biggest economy in the world. China has caught up significantly in the field of technology. Just to say briefly, China has become a competitor both for the US and also for European economies. At the same time, we see that even though China has opened up significantly, it is still an economy with a very strong state influence. State-owned enterprises play a major role. These enterprises often do not only act economically, they also have political aims, and foreign companies in China do not have a level playing field. They are at a loss when competing against those state-owned enterprises. And I think the administration is trying to get China to reform its economy, to reduce its trade deficit, and I think we share many of the concerns in Europe as far as the situation of the Chinese economy is concerned as well. Having said that, I don't think that a trade war is the right way to go. A trade war is associated with significant costs. A trade war is bad for all the economies involved, and German companies already feel the effects of that trade war. We would much rather want to see conflicts resolved within the framework of the rules-based order. Trade is a matter which is being discussed in the WTO, and we would like to see these disputes being resolved within the framework of WTO. We also think that WTO needs reforms, has to become more responsive to those concerns, and our recommendation would be to try to go this way. This would be conducive to a solution of the existing problems without having to pay the price which a trade war would incur.
Thank you. China has also been very active recently, for the last few years really, in a geopolitical sense. You can think of the Belt and Road Initiative, activities in Africa, also activities in the South China Sea. Some people are also concerned about relations with Taiwan, with Japan perhaps. Is the German government concerned as well? Would the Europeans, would the Germans do something about it in a different way than the United States, or is here a common Western front to be observed?
I think we do share some of the concerns regarding the Belt and Road Initiative. We also see the contributions China could make to economies in its vicinity and to linking up Europe and Asia even more. The European Union is developing a strategy on how to deal with connectivity between Asia and Europe, and this strategy is open. We can imagine that we can link it up with China's Belt and Road Initiative, but also with the initiative of the United States, the Free and Open Indo-Pacific. I think there are many points where we can work together in order to improve connectivity between Europe and Asia.
Thank you. Recently there's been a lot of talk about a coming conflict between the United States and China, that military conflict is almost unavoidable between one rising superpower and a status quo superpower. How do you see that very dramatic notion?
I think politicians in Beijing, in Washington and elsewhere are aware that the costs of a military conflict would be immense, and I think far-sighted leaders in Beijing, Washington and elsewhere are working to prevent that. If you look at China, you have to see that its rise so far has been relatively conflict-free. I also do believe that at the end of the day, Beijing has other priorities. It wants to keep its political system. It wants to fulfill the aspiration of the Chinese people to become a major world power, and the costs of a military conflict would endanger that aim. So I hope that politicians in all the countries concerned will have enough wisdom to prevent such a development.
Does China aspire to world leadership? Does China want to take over the leadership of the world, replace the United States?
I don't think that is their aim. Their aims are what they call the Chinese dream of the rejuvenation of the Chinese people, i.e. to bring China back into a position where they think it should be. That is very high in the world, but it does not necessarily mean world domination.
How do you interpret the current North Korea situation? North Korea used to be a very close ally of China, still is, but perhaps not as close as before. Is China worried about this situation on the Korean peninsula, or is it actually something China approves of these developments we see at the moment?
I think for China, Korea is a neighbor. I think China sees a right to be involved in Korean affairs. I think that China has no interest in a nuclear North Korea, and therefore, to a certain extent, supports efforts to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. I think for China it's very important to have a voice in this process, and I think China will continue to insert itself into this process.
Many people in the West are very concerned about the human rights situation in China, which is not becoming better, it seems. Is it not counterproductive for China to do what they do in many ways and to have a more repressive rather than a gradually freer society? And how can we bring that across?
I think that people in all Western countries would agree that a more open system respecting human rights would be better for China. Having said that, of course we have to continue to raise human rights issues with China, and that is what Germany, but also the US, is doing. On the other hand, it's also clear that in such a big country, substantial change in the human rights situation for the better is only possible if it comes from within. And we should certainly hope that China would make efforts to improve the human rights situation in that country.
What can the West do to help that along?
But I think it's important that we always raise the issue, that we invalidate the narrative that the West doesn't support human rights defenders in China. And but at the end of the day, I believe that real change can only come from within.
Thank you very much. Joern Beissert from the German Embassy in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for your insights. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you for your invitation.